Hey guys, welcome to Thoughts I Bought at a Yard Sale, and today's a big one, folks. I'm going to be talking about Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest for the Super Nintendo. And the reason it's such a big one for me is because, besides maybe Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country 2 is the most nostalgic and personal game from my childhood gaming years. There may have been games since then that have spoke to me in different ways or in certainly profound ways, but when I think of a game that just the soundtrack alone takes me back to being a kid, it's definitely DKC2. And it's one of those things where I have so much to say about the game, and yet I almost don't even know where to start. Especially because this is a game that a lot of people consider very near and dear to their hearts, so it's hard for me to come up with something that maybe they didn't say. And hopefully, whatever I come up with is at least unique enough because it's from my perspective. So, I guess the big thing to start with is why I think the game is so good, because it's nostalgic because I played it when I was a kid, and there's plenty of nostalgic games I played when I was a kid that are maybe not the greatest. Claymates comes to mind. I know that's a game that is not really great, but I love it because it was from when I was a kid. But Donkey Kong Country 2 is pretty universally acclaimed as being one of those amazing masterpiece games, and I guess I want to talk about why I think that is. And the reason I think that is because it's one of those the whole is greater than the sum of its parts things. Its individual components are amazing. It is an amazing soundtrack that has an amazing look. The graphics engine is obviously very praised for being way ahead of its time, and there is an amazing sense of movement, there's amazing controls, and all these things are great, but I've played games that have those individual elements. In fact, I'd say Super Mario World that I mentioned before is one of those ones where it has a bunch of amazing individual elements, but where Donkey Kong Country 2 succeeds beyond that is how those elements work in tandem. The core, I would say, the philosophy of Donkey Kong Country 2 is stranger in a strange land. You're on enemy territory. It's really built to be your adventure as Diddy Kong and his girlfriend Dixie Kong in this scary, Kremling-infested place, and everything is built around that core. The initial thing I've heard a lot of, not complaints, but a little confusion about as far as that goes, is that some of the setting components feel a little bit disjointed. And while going from world to world is a little bit confusing, for example, say, like, going from a swamp to a volcano might not make sense geographically, I would say you probably shouldn't judge games based on their geographical coherence. But when you start looking at the individual worlds, you start to see that not only are they self-contained and really wonderful little areas that have a lot of cool touches, like, for example, Crazy Kremland being a theme park built on a beehive, and between the two roller coaster levels you have Bramble Scramble, I believe is the title of that level, where you're in some of the brambles that crawled up over the framework of the ride. So within the worlds, they're interesting in that respect, but they're also tonally cohesive. Back to that original idea, like I said before, of you're in enemy territory. Each of these worlds is kind of a trope of a classic villain lair. We have the classic volcano lair, and then the evil airship, and the icy castle, and all these cool tropes really take you through, like, all of these evil locations. So I think even though some of the stuff might not work together, you couldn't really put all these things on the same island, I think that it's better that they had these really interesting self-enclosed areas. And then on top of that, we start to get into how the music integrates. And I will only say of the soundtrack that it is my favorite. It's easily my favorite soundtrack of any video game ever. Fight me on that. I think it is beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. I won't go super in depth with it, but it's one of my favorites. It is my favorite. But back to the main point, the soundtrack is so important to this game, not only because the melodies are so strong within it, because they are, it's that it incorporates sound elements that make sense within the level. So, like, you have these characters that are in this scary new place, and they're underdeveloped heroes. They're really testing their boundaries, and they have these cool self-contained worlds. And then on top of that, you have these soundtracks where you can hear the metal clanking in the background of Squawk's shaft, and you can hear the bubbling in the volcano, and you can hear all these little sound accents that just take you in. And that's all the game is. It's all about pulling you into this world that these two monkeys are trying to traverse to find and save another monkey. And like if you boil it down to its premise, it sounds silly, but like it's so visceral and real that you love it because it's all integrated so seamlessly. All of these elements are woven together to create an experience that is bigger than if it was just a tightly designed level. It's a whole world that you're experiencing, and it's all built together to be that. So that's why I think it's so special. That's why I think it's such a great game, and it's so highly revered. And there's other things that are part of that, obviously, but I think that it's important that we look at the bigger picture when thinking of Donkey Kong Country, because otherwise you're just saying, oh, it's got this great thing, and this great thing. And to really appreciate it, you have to look at how those things are combined so well. So that is it. Those are my thoughts on Donkey Kong Country 2. Let me know what your favorite Donkey Kong Country game is in the series. Obviously, mine's 2, but in order, I would say out of the trilogy, my favorite's number 2, then I like Donkey Kong Country 3, and my least favorite's the original, although I still think it's pretty decent. It just has some bonus room issues that I'll talk about in another video. But as always, thank you for listening and watching, and later days.